In this video, we're going to start to talk about integrating Workload Manager with Action Orchestrator. So Workload Manager, if you're not familiar with it, what it is it is our model-based cloud management platform that allows you to model something once and then decide later where you want to deploy it. And there's integrations between Workload Manager and Action Orchestrator. It's all part of something we call Cloud Center Suite that contains several modules. We're going to focus on Workload Manager and AO, but right now, let me walk you through what Workload Manager is. So Workload Manager has this concept of app profiles, and these app profiles contain things that you would use to build a solution. So let's take a look at an open cart implementation, for example. So if I go down here and I say view, what you're going to see as this comes up is the open cart implementation. So this came up now, and what we're seeing is that we have a 3-tier application here. We have a proxy server, we have a web server, and we have a database. So what this does is this makes up your whole solution. And as I said before, this is the model you model once, and then you can decide later where you want to deploy. Like if you want to deploy it to Amazon or Google or Azure or VMware, it doesn't really matter. You could decide later. As long as you design these generic enough, you could design them so that they can be deployed anywhere. Now, the way that we got here is we drag services from the left to the right to put them on this palette here and create this solution. Now, these services can be made up of things like VMs, containers, or external services. And you can actually, it comes with a whole bunch of them, but you can actually create your own too. And that's really what we're going to focus on today is how to create these services. Now, some of the things to note about these services, like this Apache server is part of an open cart implementation. And this one's based on a VM, and we could tell that by this CentOS image here, base image. And the other thing to note is that this is where the config files are. So basically what this does is it says, hey, I have an Apache server, and by the way, use this zip file to configure this Apache server. So all you have to do is create this once, and it will configure it the same way every time. One of the other nice things about this is that under firewall rules, you have firewall rules here, and these firewall rules come from the service. So you define them in the service once. They can be overridden here, and you could, of course, add 443 if you want secure. It doesn't really matter. But the nice part about it is that they have these in the services, and when you actually go to deploy, if you deploy it to, say, Amazon, it'll create security groups. If you deploy it on-prem in ACI, it'll create your ACI policy too. So depending on where you deploy it, it will actually convert it when you go to deploy it. Now, the thing we're going to focus on today, though, is the integration between Workload Manager and AO. Now, there's a couple things to note. All of these things can interact with AO. So an app profile can interact with AO by going to either external initialization or service initialization. External initialization, where you can do workflows here. So you can select a workflow if you had one that was associated with this app profile, or under node initialization and cleanup. So all these different initialization vectors, you could actually inject workflows right here. But what I'm going to show you today is how services interact. So you can actually design a service that calls a workflow, and then you could drag that service in here. Now, the one that we're going to talk about today is a RDS instance. So let's take a look at this. So let me just make this bigger here. What you see here is I have a Workload Manager deployment, so an app profile, that is going to come from a MySQL service. That service is going to be put inside an app profile. And that service, depending on when it comes up, it's going to do different things. So if we look at that, this service is tied to a workflow, and that workflow has start and stop. So on start, it's going to create a DB from this MySQL service within RDS and AWS. And on stop, it's going to delete it. So basically what this means is that if you have this and you create in your app profile and you bring that app profile up, it's going to create a DB. So anytime you bring that app profile or use that app profile to create your solution, it's going to create it. And when you bring down that app profile so that you no longer want it, it's going to delete it. So let's see how that's going to work. Let's switch back here and let's look at some of the services. So let me go down here to the services. Here we go. So this is the service page here. And if we want to just look for AWS, I know I already created this. So I have one here that says, actually, I'm sorry, I want to search for RDS. So let me search for RDS. So I have one that says WMAO, meaning that it's Workload Manager connected to AO, RDS, and it's MySQL. So let's edit that. All right, so here's the edit page. And first of all, across the top, you can see that this is based on an external service. So we have a virtual machine that could have been used, a virtual machine with agent, without agent, an external service, or a container service, which would have been Kubernetes. We chose an external service, and because of that, we have certain options. One of the nice things is that you can tie all of these different initialization vectors to a service. So what I'm doing right now is I'm throwing all of these to this WMRDS service that's in a workflow. So it's going to send the update signal, the start, the stop, the suspend, and the resume. Now, it doesn't matter how many signals you send. You could actually decide in AO what you want to do with it. So the only ones I'm really doing anything with is start and stop, but I'm sending them all there just so that I can get that information if I want to use it at a later time. Now, another thing to notice is that I have service parameters here, and I'm asking for DB instance name, master username, and master password. You notice it says service parameter, not deployment. Service means that it's going to ask when you put it in the app profile for this information. It's not going to prompt the user. If I wanted to do this at deployment, I could have done it at deployment, and when we go to deploy, it'll prompt the user for that information. So a couple different ways you could do it there. But typically when you make an app profile, I think you're going to want to create that information, pretty statically, but you can make that decision, based on your needs. So again, throwing all this stuff to WMRDS service, let's take a look at that service. So I'm going to bring up Action Orchestrator here. I'm going to open it in a new tab, and we can see that we have this WMRDS service. So if I bring that up, what you'll notice is, it's a workflow just like anything else. But the first thing I do is I get Cloud Center Suite, get Workload Manager context. And what that does is it gets me all the information about, Workload Manager and what I'm connecting to. So if I actually click down here, you'll see that there is a Workload Manager configuration. And in here, I said I want a lifecycle action. Lifecycle means that it's going to have all those different functions on start, on stop, all that kind of stuff. And on demand would mean that you execute it on demand when you want to do it. Now, the other thing that I noted is that it's not on a virtual machine. It's an external service. It's external. And also that I want it to be a service. Now, if you wanted to, you could filter out certain services. I said you could apply this to any service. So it could either be, I could either map this as an external to an application profile, a service, or a cloud region. I chose service. So that means that it's going to be mapped to those services there. Now, next thing I do is I get the job status. So basically what I do, this is a table, and I just want to get some information about that. That's just the status. So what is it doing? What process, what part is it up to? And then I want to get some of those parameters that we mapped here. So what are the name and value parameters that we have there? And then I'm going to actually loop through each one of those parameters to get the username, the password, and the DB instance name. So what I do is I get through those. Then what I do is I look at that status that we looked at before to see whether it's starting or stopping. And what you'll notice is that I have a create DB instance here and a delete DB instance there. Now, these are atomic actions that I've actually created. And if I edit the create here, you'll see that I just have a create DB instance. And really all I did is I took the Amazon API for RDS, and I put some variables in here that will allow me to inject that right into the create DB instance. Same thing I did with the delete DB instance, so I'm not going to go over that. But what you can see is that this will go through, it'll get the information that we need, and then it will also get the status. So let's view some of these runs, and I'm just going to go to year to date. And you'll see that if I click on the top one, what did it go to? Delete. So this was obviously when it brought it down, and you could actually see all this information here. So if I go to, let's just go to get Workload Manager context, just to look up the type of information you have here. Now, here is all the response body from that. So you can see we get a lot of information. Now, all I'm looking for is the status, and you can see it said job stopping. So if it's a job stopping, then that's right here, and then it's going to run whatever's in that block. So the nice thing about this is that I can get information about clouds. I can get information about the applications. I can get information about services and job owners and all kinds of information about things that are in Workload Manager IP addresses. So you can see I can use that information however I want in this context. Now, if you go back and look at that run list again, if we look at the one before that, this is actually where it created it. So it's creating that DB instance there. And what you'll notice is if I click on one of those is it'll say succeeded, true or false. So that's what it returns back and to Workload Manager, whether it was successful or not. You can also see that I have very generic things I've set up just for test here, that the DB name it got from there was Mike SQL. The master username was mchenitz, and the password was Cisco12345. Very, very, very secure stuff there. But it was successful in creating it, and it created that. So you can see that based on these policies here, when this actually gets pulled into a profile, it'll execute the things here. So what does that look like in an app profile now? So if I bring up an app profile, let's go up the AODB demo over here. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to go to deploy. Let's get out of here. So let's go up to the AODB demo over here and edit that. So here we go. So all I have is a single service. Even though you can have multiple tiers here, this is just a test. So what you'll notice is that when I select this, I have those values that we talked about here. So I get all the values about the DB instance name, the username, and the password. All this stuff gets passed to AO to execute on all those parameters. But this is actually really a workflow that is within AO, but it's part of this life cycle now. So I could use these things. And the nice thing about this is that all these new services that get created all the time on all these clouds, you can now create super easy in AO and then drag them in here. So now you don't have to wait for a company to create these services. You could do it within minutes and have it ready to pull into this modeler so that you can model these applications. So let's just see what this looks like when we run it. So we'll go to deployments. Actually, we'll go to app profiles here, and I'll just click on it. So the way that we deploy is I just create a deployment name. We're going to call this new RDS. Whoops, we'll do it with no space, new RDS. I'll pick a environment that I want to run this on. So you get to choose, just like if you had developers or production, which environments they can deploy to. Now I'm in a demo environment here, and I could deploy to AWS, Azure, or OpenStack. And also you can decide policies, and these policies can either be enforced or based on your rights and your groups and things like that. Or you could choose them. So aging policy is something like maybe you're a developer and you only want to give them maybe 30 days, and then you could choose what to do. Do you want it to spin it down? Do you want to send them an email? What do you want to do there? And suspension policy is maybe you want to run it from 9 to 5, and then you just want it to suspend after those hours, so you could save some money in the cloud. And you can see I have a tier setting here that doesn't really have any settings. So if I go next, this is really the important part. I can choose which cloud I want to deploy to. So as I pick these clouds, I get different cloud options. But the nice thing about this is it's an external service, so it really doesn't matter right here. I am using Amazon, so you really won't see some of those options since it's an external service. It was VM based, you would see the instances and instance costs and all that kind of stuff. So let's just click deploy here, and it says your application is attempting to deploy. So once this gets deployed, then it will show up in RDS. So let's see what we got here. Okay, so you can see it's starting, it's getting ready to deploy. And what I'll do is I'll bring up, as we're doing this, I will bring up our AWS instance here. So let me bring this up. I'll hit my two-factor auth. All right. And I'll go to RDS. And I'll go to databases. All right. So let's go back to here to the cloud application. It says deploying. So it's going to bring this all up right now. All right, so you can see now that it's successfully deployed. You can see details about it here. And you can see that you can see a little bit more information here. And if we go back into Action Orchestrator and go to the runs, you'll see that today, here it is. It's successful. It ran. It created the DB instance. And now if I refresh here, let's refresh on RDS, you'll see I have that MySQL. So that's in the process of being created right now. So that's about it. What we did is we tied Workload Manager service with an AO workflow so that we can quickly create these interactions with some cloud services that you would normally have to wait for a company to create. So now you don't really have to do that. You can just kind of drag some things around, and as long as you know what the API calls are, you can quickly create these interactions that'll allow you to pull it right into an app profile. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.